How's everybody doing today? My name is Chad, and my speech topic that I'm doing today is going to be on the percent of athletes recovering from an ACL, PCL, and MCL tear. Now, the reason I chose this topic is because it's something that's actually very near and dear to my heart. As many of you guys know, I talk about football like all of my speeches, right? So I used to play football. I used to play football at the University of Ohio Wesleyan, and in my sophomore year, the very first game and the very first play, I completely tore my ACL, my MCL, and my PCL all in my right knee. It only took about 3 seconds for them all to completely tear. Hence why I named this speech titled 3 Seconds. So I kind of want to get into it a little bit more with you guys and explain to you the mishaps and all of the rehabilitation that I had to go through and the percentages wise and how tearing all three of them is very unlikely and how coming back to your sport is also very unlikely. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first, let's talk about the percent of athletes returning from their torn ligaments, right? Whether it's just the ACL, MCL, or PCL. So a study shows that about 70.8% of athletes recover from an ACL and an MCL tear, just one of them. Now, that's only if they're both partially teared or partially torn, excuse me. If an ACL is completely torn, only about 50% of athletes recover from that. All right, and that's from all sports. For MCL, about 55.6 recover from that if it is completely fully torn. Now, with technology and everything that we have nowadays, those numbers have bumped up a little bit. So from what it used to be 50% for ACLs, it is now up to around 70%, and MCLs are now around 60%. So medicine and common health has actually helped us out a lot. However, for PCLs are a little bit different. For PCLs, it's about 44% recovering from it, whether it's completely torn or if it's only partially torn. Now, again, like I stated to you guys earlier, I torn all three in my right knee. So let's talk about the effects and the long-term effects about all of these. So some of the biggest things that come from tearing an ACL, MCL, or PCL, some of the long-term effects that studies have shown is that a lot of people start to develop, well, obviously a lot of knee problems. You start to develop things like arthritis. That's probably the biggest one. And from me tearing all three, my percentage of obtaining arthritis when I get older is very, very high. It is actually around, I actually have it written down here, it is actually around 86%. So, yeah, it's kind of crappy. However, so let's talk about what I had to do to recover. All right, so rehabilitation, it involved a lot of range of motion in my knees, working out wise, right? So since I played football, I couldn't obviously get back on the field. I was told that I was done for the rest of the season, but I had to rehab every day. And when I first started rehabbing, it was very, very, very hurtful because, the injury had just only happened. And I had to have it in a cast. And I thought to myself, well, how am I going to rehab if I'm in a cast? It doesn't make any sense. But I had to do simple exercises, like just as far as lifting my leg up and down, even when I had it in a cast, which hurt. And then eventually I got used to it and it started to get better. But over time, that does still lead into a lot of major problems, even given all the science and all the medical stuff that we do have nowadays. So the percent of athletes that don't recover, right? So there's a small percent, and that percent is 15.5% of athletes that don't recover from any of these tears. I unfortunately fell under that 15%. Due to tearing all three of those ligaments in my knees, I wasn't able to bend my knee properly or have that slight bend that I would need to have in order to play the position that I played. And once the doctor told me that, I was kind of heartbroken, but he was just only showing me the facts that even if I got in surgery on my knee, the chances of me re-tearing it were upwards of 85%. Now, it's a risk that I did want to take. However, thinking it over and thinking about long term, I just decided it wouldn't be for the best. So I didn't end up taking it. So those are some of the long-term effects, right? And now I wanted to speak to you guys about how I personally went through the rehabbing process myself. A lot of athletes don't like it. A lot of athletes don't like the whole rehab process, but they know if they want to do it, they have to get back to their sports. Well, my rehab was a little bit different because I wasn't rehabbing to get back to my sport. However, I was just rehabbing to get back to the normal use of my leg, which was completely different. And I felt as though there was not a lot of motivation to rehab because I wasn't getting back to my sport, to where a lot of athletes do have that motivation to want to hurry up and get it right and get back out on the field or the court or et cetera, whatever their sport is. But for me, like I said, since football was over with, I felt as though the rehabbing was just annoying. There was no point to it. And rehabbing my knee weeks in for about, I probably rehabbed for about over 8 months until my knee was fully functional again. And I was able to actually start working out again. And so after I was able to work out again, I realized that it was actually pretty hard for me. Like, I still felt a lot of issues in my knee. Even to this day, it still kind of hurts. When it's like small stuff, like when it's cold outside or anything like that, I still feel that aching feeling within my knee, which kind of sucks. And that's some of the lingering issues that a lot of athletes do face after tearing any ligaments in their knee. They still actually feel the after effects even after the surgery and everything is over with. My knee is still very limited in range of motion, even though I am cleared to work out. There's still a lot of workouts that I cannot do that calls for my leg to fully extend using that knee, because that muscle is still very weak because I tore all three at the same time. And that's basically it. So again, just to give you guys a little recap, the percent of athletes that recover from an ACL and an MCL tear are around upwards of 70%, 50% for MCL, and for PCL it's around like that 40% area, even with modern day medicine and stuff that we have. But for the percentage of athletes that actually don't recover, that is that lower tier 15%, in which I actually do fall under. I do thank you guys for listening to my speech, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.